and welcome to this another episode of ECCB Connects. This week we'll be discussing the Eastern Caribbean Asset Management Corporation, and I have with me advisor in the Strategic Planning and Projects Department, Kennedy Byron. Kennedy, welcome to ECCB Connects.
Thank you very much, Shomolan. Thank you for having me.
Kennedy, the Eastern Caribbean Asset Management Corporation is an entity that's now established in the 8 member countries of the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, and this was done under the directive of the Monetary Council. Kennedy, what is the Eastern Caribbean Asset Management Corporation?
As you rightly said, Shomolan, the Eastern Caribbean Asset Management Corporation that came about from the agreement of the Monetary Council, who decided to establish this institution as a tool towards assisting with financial stability and thereby in terms of strengthening the financial system. The ECMC agreement gives the institution special powers in order for it to execute its mandate efficiently.
Why was there a need to establish this corporation?
Well, Shomolan, let me go back to the pre-global crisis period where the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union actually enjoyed tremendous growth. Some territories had upper digit growths. It was mainly fueled by the commercial banking system, which actually extended credit for a number of things, including commercial properties and also residential properties. So once the effects of the global crisis reached the shores of the ECCU, what then happened was that these financial institutions were tremendously impacted. And that is because we had investors, external investors, and even the local investors who were no longer with the capacity to address their obligations. And so the international banks and the national banks alike were really impacted by this. And this was reflected in their balance sheets, and more so by the increase of the non-performing loans in the balance sheet. The Monetary Council then decided, once they would have looked at what was done around the world to address such a crisis, and particularly looking at NAMA, that's in Ireland, that's the National Asset Management Agency, and what they did to address these things. Essentially, the Monetary Council decided to establish Asset Management Corporation.
Kennedy, how will the Eastern Caribbean Asset Management Corporation function?
The entity will function primarily based on the legislation. In fact, a board is already in place. The owners of the institution would have selected a board member each, that's the 8 territories. And so the board would have met on several occasions already, and they're actually moving towards establishing strategic plans and putting in place the processes and policies and so forth. Most importantly, in terms of creating that marketing strategy. And so once they would have determined what prospective business is there, they would finalize the business plan, and then they would get into the full operation of the management of assets. In terms of its functions, the Asset Management Corporation has 2 functions. One, to act as a receiver and appointed by the ECCB under the Banking Act, and that is through its normal regulatory and supervisory function under the ECCB agreement, and that is where you use the special powers. So essentially that will be the first aspect, and then secondly, you have now to act as a manager of assets. And so you have the institution that would actually manage the assets towards its eventual disposition of these assets under a receivership function. However, where there is also the case where it can acquire assets, non-performing loans, that is, from institutions that are approved by the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank. And these approved institutions are licensed financial institutions and or savings institutions which are deemed to be systemic by the ECCB.
Kennedy, there have been some concerns raised that the ECAMC is there to take away people's property.
Well, that definitely is not the case. In fact, when the ECMC is appointed by the ECCB, what it will do is to actually manage the assets of the receivership that it is being appointed to manage. And therefore, individual borrowers would be interviewed and they would be given opportunities to have some workout arrangements. And therefore, they would have a chance to maintain their homes or whatever properties that they have within the receivership.
Okay, you've mentioned receivership several times, so break it down, explain the concept of receivership.
Okay, for instance, we have a bank which would have failed, and the ECCB would have appointed a receiver, an individual receiver. And so therefore, the individual receiver would be managing that receivership towards winding up the institution. So once the ECAMC is appointed to replace the individual receiver, the ECAMC will continue towards workout arrangements and trying to ensure that the persons involved each have opportunities towards maintaining their position with their loans.
And this is in the case of, because there are 3 banks that have gone through that process or going through the process. We have 1 in Antigua and 2 in Anguilla. So the 2 in Anguilla, for sure, I know they're under receivership. So when the ECAMC comes into operation, that entity will take over the role of the current receiver.
That's right, Shamalan. What would happen is that the ECCB would appoint the ECAMC as receiver for the 2 banks in Anguilla, or the 2 receiverships in Anguilla, and the 1 in Antigua and Barbuda. And therefore, it would make the individual receiverships null and void.
A depositor who had funds in one of these 3 banks might ask a question, so the ECMC, what does it mean for me? How do I benefit from having the ECMC?
What would happen here is that the depositor would have to understand from a macro perspective the importance of the ECMC. It's not only about the individual depositors who would benefit definitely from the establishment of the ECMC. However, it would be the entire region, because what you would have the ECMC doing is, given its special powers, it would move the assets, the non-performing assets, off of the balance sheets of the institutions that we have operating in our space. And what that will do is free up the institutions to actually attract more capital, because with cleaner balance sheet, you would have a much better attraction in terms of getting investors to come in to bring additional capital. Or even with respect to mergers and amalgamation, you would see that institutions would need to get their balance sheet in a position that is attractive, so that they can join forces and become a stronger entity. And so once you have stronger entities in the region, of course you will have a stronger system. And the member governments, which is the Monetary Council, they are really interested in ensuring that we have a system that can facilitate growth and development.
So the ECMC boils right down to the people in terms of having stronger a banking system and a financial system overall, and that will trickle down to benefits to the people, security for their deposits.
That is right, Shamalan. In fact, what you would have the ECMC doing is trying to ensure that they get the best prices available for these assets. In fact, in the receiverships, let me just make the distinction. In the receiverships, the
And you're speaking about the current receiverships.
That's right. The ECMC, once they are appointed to manage the receiverships, they would start to ensure that they put these assets in a position where they are much more attractive to dispose of. And when I say dispose of, if Shomalan has an account with the receivership and Shomalan demonstrates the capacity to repay within certain terms agreed between the ECMC and Shomalan, what would happen then, once Shomalan would have continued to pay as agreed, the ECMC will then be in a position to sell that loan account of Shomalan. And therefore, that would now come back to the ECMC. And of course, he would take care of its expenses, and then he would also have that funds coming back to go towards the deposit liabilities of the receivership. And then on the other hand, we have where they would purchase, the ECMC would purchase NPLs from approved institutions, as I said before. And the intent of the ECMC would definitely be to attract the best price possible. And that is again because you would want to take care of your expenses and also to have a return of capital to the member governments who would have actually put in the capital to establish the institution.
What are the next steps for the ECAMC?
Next steps, Shomalan, would be to try to get all the necessary systems and the strategic plans and everything in place in order to officially operationalize the institution.
Where will this entity be based?
The entity actually is based in Antigua and Barbuda. It's headquartered in Antigua and Barbuda. And based on the legislation, it can have branches throughout the ECCU.
Kennedy, thank you very much for speaking with us on ECCB Connects.
Thank you very much, Shomalan.
You're watching ECCB Connects, protecting our currency, developing our region. And now for this week's financial tip.
Track your expenses to see where you spend money.
You can probably find something to cut back on and save.
To view any episode of ECCB Connects, anytime, any place, at your convenience, check out our YouTube channel, ECCB Connects.
We've come to the end of another episode of ECCB Connects. Remember, ECCB Connects is produced by the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank to help you understand who we are, what we do, and how we serve you. Join us again next week when we'll be back with another program.